So if you've noticed on the application on your phone, the Fluent Listener application on the phone, that you have the Speak Better exercises, and you're wondering how these are going to help you speak better, this video will help you understand that. So here's an example of a Speak Better exercise, and first I want to tell you how you use them, or how I use them, is I let them play, and I just let them loop. And as they loop, I'm repeating it 2 seconds after the speaker. So at first, I might not hear everything or catch everything. I might not be able to repeat. It might take me a little while, and I get better and better at repeating these sounds. But what I'm doing is just letting them repeat. So it's not intense work. It's more kind of like listening along to a song on the radio and trying to sing along with it, except that we're repeating after the speaker so that we can hear what the speaker is saying and then try to make those same sounds. So first I'll show you how I use them. If I am on this recording here and I click on
Et
play,
c'est une
et c'est
formation
une
qui est
formation
faite par
qui est
des
faite
maîtres fleuristes
par des maîtres
européens.
fleuristes
Et
européens,
c'est
européens,
une
et c'est
formation
une
qui est
formation
faite
qui est
par des
faite
maîtres
par des
fleuristes
maîtres
européens.
fleuristes. And I might not have heard
Et
fleuriste
c'est
there. I might
une
listen.
formation qui est faite par des maîtres fleuristes
Fleuriste,
européens.
fleuriste européen.
Et c'est une
So what I'm getting out of this first is that I'm using the words and speaking the words. So that's going to help me get my tongue and mouth, tongue and lips moving and producing the sounds. So because I've produced the sounds so often, I'm a little less inhibited by the oral gymnastics of trying to produce these words that I'm not used to saying. I'm now used to saying these words. And an hour of spoken French from all the work we've done, we know that's about 10,000 words. So if you listen and repeat to these recordings and you're working with them, you're going to get quite a lot of normal, everyday words that you're used to saying. And that's going to help you find your words more quickly and produce them and say them more quickly because you've already had the experience of speaking these words. So the first is just getting the words out. That's the first thing that's big about these recordings. The next is that you're learning what I would call pronunciation accuracy and the rhythm. And by accuracy, I mean not how you pronounce the French R. When I talk about pronunciation accuracy, I'm talking about producing the right vowel sound. So an example is this word formation. A lot of non-native speakers who come from English are going to see that word early on in their French learning and think that that is formation, formation. But it doesn't really sound like formation. It's formation. Do you hear the difference? Formation and formation. A lot of non-native speakers coming from English are going to tend to pronounce that formation, and they're going to have learned if they know the word. If they've learned the word, they probably will have learned formation just because that's what seems most normal when you're coming from English. So these types of recordings help you hear those differences, helps you hear the way it really is pronounced, but you won't hear it the first time. You might notice it the third or fourth time. So this is how I learned how to correctly pronounce enregistrer, which is the word for to record, like to make a sound recording, enregistrer. The first 15 years I lived in France, I was pronouncing that enregistrer. Do you hear the difference? Enregistrer is incorrect. Enregistrer is correct. And it was because of these recordings, me listening as I drove around the town in my car, listening to these recordings, that I learned that I finally noticed that after 15 years of not auto-correcting in normal conversations. I had heard that word before, but I never noticed it. It's because these recordings are slow and because I have time to listen and repeat that I finally noticed that I had been mispronouncing that word. So another thing about these recordings, like if you take this example, is you'll start to get the liaison, you'll start to pick up the pattern and you'll start to make them naturally in the places where the French people make them all the time. So for an example is c'est une formation. Do you hear how the T is being pronounced here? Let's loop this a little smaller and listen to the T there.
Une et c'est une et c'est une et c'est une
Now, as a normal non-native speaker coming from English, you would tend to say, you'd translate in your head and say, et c'est une formation, and you wouldn't get in the habit of saying c'est une. But if you're hearing it over and over and you're saying it, c'est une, it becomes a habit. And you need that habit to be there because that T helps the French listener understand what you're saying. That T is there for a reason. It's to help comprehension. So when you say c'est une and you've said it a few times, it becomes a habit. It becomes easier for you to say automatically. So we want to be able to say certain things automatically and quickly just because they're almost kind of like filler words. They need to be there in the sentence, but they're spoken so often that we need them to just roll off our tongue. That's what these recordings help you do. There was another thing I was going to tell you. Okay, then we go to an example like this last word, Européen. A lot of English speakers are going to put a Y in front of it, Européen. They're going to say Européen. It's Européen without a Y. That may be a little bit harder for you to notice, but hopefully you'll notice that type of thing if you're listening carefully and working along with these recordings. So
faite
let's listen to
par
that.
des maîtres
Européen,
fleuristes européens,
no Y.
fleuristes européens,
You don't hear a Y. So these types of recordings help you autocorrect. Autocorrection is not really possible when you are living and working in France. You don't autocorrect, unfortunately. We get to a certain level, and where we're comfortable, that's where we stay. And if we already know how to pronounce a word, we think we know how to pronounce a word, that's where we stay. If we have a certain way of saying something that's not really French, but that is usually understood, we retain that way of saying the thing that it isn't really French because it's already comfortable for us. It's part of our vocabulary. It's part of the way we speak. It makes us sound cute, maybe, for our coworkers, but we don't really evolve. These recordings help you evolve and help your French become more French. Uh, what I'm talking about is using the right words that French people use instead of your translations that you got from English. So an example of using the right word instead of your English translation is, well, I'll tell you a mistake I made recently, and it made me think about this again and think, I need to get back to listening to um, my Speak Better recordings when I'm in the car. So here's what I did. Uh, we're at work. Okay, I work with all French people, French speakers, and we're at work. And there was a joke made about something, and I added something about the coffee machine being broken. And I used the wrong word. I used a word that I translate from English, the word broken, and the word I used, instead of giving the idea to the listeners that the coffee machine had stopped functioning, it gave the image of the coffee machine breaking into pieces. Those are two different type of breakages. One, you have break into pieces, and you have stop functioning. And I used the wrong term, and of course nobody laughed because it just made them go, wait a second, the coffee machine didn't break into pieces. It's not lying there in pieces on the floor. So they had to think for a second, what did he mean? Maybe he means that it just stopped functioning. It's two different words in French, and I used the wrong one, and it made me think, I need to get back to these Speak Better recordings and keep my French evolving, keep getting used to using words that French people really use instead of my translation from English. Um, the last thing is working on your tongue and lip movements to get this pesky French R to get it right. So these recordings give you a chance to experiment with your tongue and lips. Uh, you can't do that type of experiment when you're having a conversation with a French person because you have to think about what they're saying, you're thinking about meaning and expressing yourself and looking at your speaker, looking into their eyes to understand what they're saying. There's too many other things to think about. There are too many other things to think about. It's with these types of recordings that I work on my tongue and lip movements and try to make those same sounds. So if I listen to fleuriste, I can hear that fleuriste, fleuriste, I can try to experiment with my tongue and lips to do two things. What you're looking for is two things. You want to try to make the sound they made, of course, but think also about how can I move my tongue and lips to make this sound or to make this word easy to produce? How can I make that easy to make? And so that's I'm giving you a little key for finding the right tongue and lip movements. How can I make that series of sounds easy to produce? And keep experimenting with moving your tongue and lips different ways until you find the best way to produce these sounds. So a lot of this, what we're doing is there's an intellectual part of using the right words. There's an intellectual part of hearing the right vowel sounds and trying to use them. And then there's kind of what I call oral gymnastics of you've got a series of sounds that you have to produce. And many times this happens to me too, is there's a series of sounds I just can't produce quickly. So these types of recordings help you produce those sounds, get used to producing the sounds so that when you're speaking to a French person, your French is more fluid, comes out more easily, you find your words more easily. That's why I call these the Speak Better recordings, and I hope you enjoy them.